it's clear, 100% clear that Ukrainians are innovating the war, this war faster than anybody else, at least the weapons. I mean, look what they've done with the drones. Secondly, they've knocked out the Russian naval fleet in the Black Sea without a navy. That's a win.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I am joined by Bryan Lanza, a former Deputy Communications Director and former Senior Advisor to Donald Trump. Bryan, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again.
Great. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on and great to have your expertise as someone who has worked in government, so literally knows what is happening right now. It is October 1st, start of the month. There is now a partial government shutdown. The Senate failed to pass short-term funding a bill. Most Republicans supported the bill. So can you kind of walk me through what this means for an international audience who kind of don't really understand how US government works?
Yeah, of course, it's the end of the fiscal year, so every year, the government has to pass a budget. We were not successful in passing a budget earlier in the year, when Chuck Schumer, Chuck Schumer ended up doing what's called a continuing resolution, a CR. So the current budget that President Trump and Congress is operating right now is under Joe Biden's budget from last year, because nothing's been passed this year. And so what Congress is doing right now, what the U.S. Senate, the Democrats on the U.S. Senate side are doing, is Republicans need 7 of their votes to pass this CR, and Republicans actually have 3 of their votes. So there's 3 senators, Democratic senators, who are supporting the Republicans' budget. Senator August King from Maine, Senator John Fetterman, and I forget who the third woman is. It's Mastro from Nevada. So what you have now is a bipartisan budget supported by Republicans and Democrats, but you still need more Democratic votes. And the Democratic leadership in the Senate are making requests that are just completely unreasonable, that are unheard of, right? They're making policy decisions, requests that parties and powers normally don't make and shouldn't make because they lost the election. And policy, and so the President Trump's budget reflects the policies of the voters who voted for him. And Democrats are saying, no, it's too much. We're going to put a line in the sand. We're going to shut down the government to make sure that we can add $1.5 trillion more in spending for 7 weeks. By the way, this is only this is a CR, continuing resolution, for 7 weeks. We want to add $1.5 trillion new spending for the next 7 weeks, which is just obscene and unheard of. And President Trump and the Republicans said no. This is the budget that Joe Biden passed. We're only asking for a short time expansion. The appropriators from both sides, Republicans and Democrats, say we'll have this done by late November. We just need a little bit more time, a bridge. But Chuck Schumer, because he's so politically weak in New York and threatened by everything on the left, threatened by AOC, all these left-leaning policymakers, doesn't want to do a deal. He wants to hold Congress up.
So, Bryan, the government shutdown, it basically, what we're seeing right now is that both parties are blaming each other. Republicans, as you mentioned, they kind of just want to keep the status quo. So they want to keep spending in place as it already has been, while Democrats want healthcare and Medicaid provisions to be made. So while Democrats obviously have a point that there are vulnerable communities without proper healthcare, the Republicans are just arguing, let's get to November 21st. So I guess my question is it worth for the resolution to just be passed by Democrats, get to November, and for both parties to come together, redo a spending bill that would provide better health care to those minorities?
Yeah, I mean that's the normal thing to do. That is what has been done in the past. I mean, we're asking, it's a short-term bridge. You have Republicans and Democrats who both agree that the short-term bridge is necessary so we can hit those benchmarks and fix those problems that exist. The problem here, like I said, it's Chuck Schumer. Because he's so politically vulnerable, he can't do anything seem like he's cooperating with President Trump, because the far extreme liberal base here in the United States want no cooperation between Democrats and Trump. And so Chuck Schumer's stuck. He's been squeezed by the base, who said, we don't want you to do the responsible thing. We want you to shut government down. We want to be confrontational with President Trump. We want to push things that are abnormal, that have never been done at this particular moment. And it doesn't matter that people are going to lose their jobs, that programs are going to be shut. We want to fight. And Chuck, the Senate Minority Leader, not being responsible, scared of a political threat on the left, is going along with it. It's just completely irresponsible.
But Brian, to play devil's advocate, say if the roles were reversed and the Republicans didn't control the House or the Senate and they were in this situation, is this what happens where you're in such a time sensitivity, time crunch to pass a spending bill that you need to use it as a bargaining chip?
Yeah, listen. I mean, Republicans have passed CRs, during Joe Biden and Joe. I mean, I think there were 7 CRs that were passed during Joe Biden's tenure, and it had Republican votes. I mean, so it's you know, ultimately we have had shutdowns in the past. The last one we had was 7 years ago, and oftentimes the party that's pushing a policy change is the one who loses the discussion because voters, because the president in power gets to have their budget. You don't get to have policy discussions after the election. The elections where you have the policy debate, and we're now on the implementation side, and the Democrats are saying no, no. Our base wants us to be irresponsible. Our crazy liberal base. Our base wants confrontation. We don't want anything to grow. So we're going to do abnormal things. Like I said, Republicans passed CRs during Joe Biden. They needed our votes, and and Speaker Johnson did the responsible thing and gave them the votes.
If the Democrats do pass this resolution, do you think that do you think they can rely on Republicans to listen to them come mid-November when they actually want to talk about getting proper health care?
I mean, that's the negotiation to set, right? Like, this CR is only it's only for 7 weeks, so you can use that time to sit at a table, have the negotiations, make good deals, your side be responsible. This is the way it's normally done. If there's a break in trust, that's why you have the negotiations. You set triggers in these negotiations to make sure that your positions, your priorities are being honored, and this administration or any administration can't break them. But you have to go to the table and have these negotiations. And what you have in Chuck Schumer is, like, he goes, we can't have any negotiations, any real negotiations, because it's policy things that my crazy liberal Democratic base want us to pass, even though we lost an election. It'd be, the only example I can think of, I'll think of a UK example, is imagine, Liz Truss still having, fighting policy decisions against the current government, and saying, I don't care that I was thrown out years ago. This is what my people want.
Brian, let me ask you this. Do Republicans believe that there is a healthcare crisis in the US?
Of course, we've always believed Obamacare is broken and it wouldn't work. It's funny that we're always having this debate and saying, "Hey, why aren't Republic? We need to fix Obamacare. We need to fix Obamacare. We need to do these things." Republicans said this at the very beginning. This Obamacare doesn't fix our healthcare issues. And
But what about the big, beautiful bill, Brian? Didn't that take away a lot of healthcare for Americans?
no, it took away healthcare, or it took away services for people who weren't working, right? It took away healthcare for illegal aliens. What the Democrats had done is they created workarounds that allowed healthcare to be, for healthcare to cover illegal aliens. And that's just not a policy decision that the American people want, Republicans and Democrats.
But do you think ordinary Americans believe that those that can't work should be able to receive adequate health care?
Oh, no, no. Those obviously who can't work don't get should get health care. I mean, that, Republicans do support that policy. We're paying for that policy. But what we're saying is this Obamacare never made sense. It was going to only add more cost to the issues, not less cost. And it's been proven overright. Every couple of years, we got to come bail out Obamacare because of what Republicans said early on, that the media, the left, and the politicians don't want to hear, is that this particular Obamacare, it doesn't fix the problem. And we're now, what, in the fourth bailout of Obamacare? I think it's proof that the problem doesn't work. There has to be better approaches, and our approaches were never brought to the table because when we had this healthcare discussion during Obamacare, which received no Republican votes, Republicans were excluded.
Brian, this government shutdown, it's not affecting, the rich elected officials in government. It affects ordinary Americans. It affects those small, government workers working in parks. And it also affects the US economy. So I wonder, do you think this system still works where we have two very divided sides that fail to pass a funding bill of which is just for 7 weeks, as you pointed out?
I listen. Do I think democracy or representative democracy works? Absolutely. The key is you got to make sure you elect the right people, and you got to have the leaders that can tell the crazies of your party no. And that's the problem, is right now the vacuum of leadership with Senator Schumer and his party. He's letting the left, the far left, go crazy on him. Mike Johnson has crazy people in his House caucus. But when he's put upon this decision to do responsible things, he tells those crazy folks no. Chuck Schumer can't tell the crazies no because he's so politically weak and threatened by AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, that he's going to do every crazy thing that the left wants to do. And that's bad for the country, all because Chuck Schumer doesn't have the testicular fortitude to tell the crazies no.
Well, I think the Democrats have a lot to learn from the 2024 election, as you point out. We don't need to be adhering so much to identity politics. And so my question to you is, Bryan, when you look at this government shutdown, do you think that both parties are representing and thinking of their constituents?
Oh, absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, you know, I believe both parties are thinking about their constituents, yes, but what we have is a party right now that's being responsible. These things get settled on election day, right? The policy disputes that you have, people show up to the polls, they vote, they encourage other people to vote, we count the votes, and then we look at it and say, okay, this is the policy direction that this country wants to go. President Trump received over 300 electoral votes. That's a very, a large number. It's great. But what we don't have is these obstructionist Democrats who say we don't care about what the American people want. We don't care that an election took place to solve it. We've got this crazy radical leftist base that we need to appease, and it doesn't matter what election takes place. It doesn't matter how obstructionist we have to be. We don't have the testicular fortitude to tell them no because they're loud and vocal. So we're going to close down the government and cause great harm to a lot of people.
So, what about the middle ground, Bryan? What about those left leaning individuals that are not so far on the left, as extremists as you would say? They're not talking about identity politics, they're not talking about trans rights, they're talking about more libertarian. They want a great economy, they want great jobs, they want healthcare, they want basic rights. And then, of course, you've got middle ground American conservatives who are not MAGA, their middle ground. And so it seems that there is this massive demographic of Americans that can't really be heard.
No, I mean, listen, I mean, Donald Trump received over 75 million votes. He received over 300 electoral college. Those voices, and that's the majority of the country, are being heard. What you really have at the end of the day, I hate to sound repetitive, is you have a vacuum of leadership in Chuck Schumer. Earlier in the year, when he let the CR go forward, I think we both remember he did a CR, he got destroyed by his liberal base. They attacked him. I mean, he was brutalized on national television. Fundraising went down, all these horrible things. And Chuck Schumer's just like, no, I'm not going to do the responsible thing and get attacked again. And so he's putting politics over the American people. Yes, people are going to hurt. They're going to suffer. But the only reason we're in this shutdown is because Chuck Schumer, like I said, doesn't have the testicular fortitude to tell these crazies no. By the way, we've received Democratic votes on this budget. John Fetterman from Pennsylvania is a left-leaning progressive, and he recognizes that this is wrong, right? You've got Angus King, an independent who caucuses with the Democrats out of Maine. He thinks Chuck Schumer's position is wrong and voted with Republicans, right? And you have a more center left, as we'd say, but a little bit more mainstream in Senator Cortez out of Nevada, in the Democratic Party. She agreed. So you have a broad bipartisan coalition representative of the country, more than this crazy liberal base that Chuck Schumer's holding us hostage for, who agree that this is the responsible thing to do. It's truly just a Chuck Schumer shutdown.
Well, we hope it doesn't last long. As you mentioned, there's a lot riding on these government shutdowns, Bryan. They can't go for too long. But let's move on to the international stage. We've seen Donald Trump really switching sides when it comes to Ukraine. He says that Ukraine can win this war. Russia isn't prevailing or gaining the grounds or holding the front lines the way that Putin would say that they are. He said that it's imperative to keep up NATO support. But Bryan, there's been a lot of discussion, especially with JD Vance, over whether the United States is willing to send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, as Zelensky has requested. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think the US should be doing this?
Listen, I love to play chess. And I think strategically you have to do something and tell Putin you're doing it so that he understands real consequences are taking place, right? I don't think if the United States were to give Ukraine these Tomahawk missiles, that Ukraine should just start bombing them into Russia or into Moscow. I think there's got to be key, boundaries there. I think that it's got to be telegraphed. It's got to be, President Putin, we're going to give these Ukrainians, these weapons if, huge if you attack at these levels that you've been attacking, and if you start hitting more civilians, if you start hitting more, critical non-war assets, we're going to let them unleash what they need to unleash to protect themselves. And so the action ultimately falls on Vladimir Putin, whether he decides to take that action, understanding what the consequences are, or he just, says, let me slow this down then.
Now, the other option is to provide these Tomahawk missiles to the EU, to NATO, to then give to Ukraine, but more so tell the Ukrainian troops that they can use them to continue to target infrastructure that hurts the Russian economy, such as these Russian oil refineries.
I mean, these I mean, they're doing a great job, by the way, with the drones, right? They've knocked out 30% of Russia's oil infrastructure with just drones. So, I mean, and here, I don't want to, tell you exactly why President Trump flipped his position and said the Ukrainians can win, but let's analyze the benchmarks that are taking place. Usually, the person who wins a war is the one who innovates the fastest. It's clear. 100% clear that Ukrainians are innovating the war, this war faster than anybody else, at least the weapons. I mean, look what they've done with the drones. Secondly, they've knocked out the Russian naval fleet in the Black Sea without a navy. That's a win. There's no other way. There's no other way to think about that as a huge win. In one of the sort of positions of war. The other thing is we've knocked out. The Ukrainians have knocked out a third of the Russians' nuclear aerial fleet with drones. I mean, we couldn't do that in our wildest day. They did it in several hours. And so when you have to look at the key benchmarks is Ukraine's winning the innovation war. When you're looking at just in a rough number of casualties, Russia had 20,000 casualties in July. You know how many casualties took place during the Afghanistan war in the 80s with them? 15,000, and the country went crazy. They had 20,000 in 1 month, over 15,000 in 10 years. So when you look at human resources, Ukraine is actually doing a good job of preserving their resources while Russia's doing it. So the troop, not the troop war level, but the troop casualty level, Ukraine's winning that as well. There hasn't, the territory, Ukraine's making inroads on these territories. Russia's not advancing as it used to. When you look at the dynamics other than just overall territory, which Russia, with their early assault was very successful, the components of winning does not look like they're on Vladimir Putin's side, and that's why you saw President Trump flip his position.
Yeah, it did seem that US intelligence had, Trump was being fed US intelligence that showed that Putin was lying, that Ukraine was making insane headway and doing so much with the little resources, as you mentioned, Brian. But Donald Trump, he spoke to top US generals in Virginia. He alluded to being a peacemaker, naming the conflicts that he's helped mend. He said, he suggested that perhaps the Nobel Peace Prize is in order for the US and said it would be insulting if they don't get it.
He wants the Peace Prize.
He says, will you get the Nobel Peace Prize? Alluding to the United States. Absolutely not. They'll give it to some guy that didn't do a damn thing. Brian, I mean, so many analysts come on the show and they say, look, Trump just wants the Nobel Peace Prize. But surely this is now quite obvious. He's vying for the Nobel Peace
Give him the
Prize.
damn prize. Give him the damn prize already. No, listen, I mean, so a friend of mine in the administration says, how can you deny Trump the Peace Prize? He's actually board of the peace, he's on the board. He's chairman of the peace board between Israel and Palestine right now. I mean, listen, I, we all think it's funny, but it's refreshing to find somebody who has a goal and who's moving the earth to hit that goal. That's certainly a principle I would teach to others. And I think it's a principle that the American people are seeing like, listen, this guy's setting a goal and he's busting his ass to get that goal. That's a good thing. And by the way, the goal is peace. Even better.
Or is the goal the Peace Prize, Brian? Is this, I mean, or does it even matter? Like, who cares why he wants
Who
peace?
cares? Who
Or do
cares?
you think this is more so as a bit of a dig to Obama?
Of course it is. Of course. Obama got a peace prize for running the presidential campaign. Okay, listen, I'm a political operative. I think we're worthy of everything like that. So yes, let's let political operatives compete for the Peace Prize. Absolutely. But Trump wants it, and he's doing. Listen, if the end result of these efforts are less killings, how do you not give it to him?
Well, we'll wait and see. 44 minutes into that speech from Trump to these senior members of the US military, Trump said that he had spoken to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He said we should use some of these dangerous cities in America as training grounds for our military. No, Bryan, this is an incredibly crazy thing to say, a bit of an authoritarian thing to say, to equate American cities to war zones, to blur the line between combat training and civilian governance. So come on, respond to this, because I mean, you've worked with him, Bryan. This is getting a bit out of control.
Listen, I don't agree with that policy, obviously. But I think you have to sort of understand the context of where his head is on this, right? If you remember during his reelection, you had Black Lives Matters. Protests were taking place up. These things were violent episodes, and what you had is you had leaders in the country at that time who didn't want to do anything. The state and local leaders. And that is extremely frustrating to watch, your cities and community burn, just because these local leaders want to prove a political point that chaos is happening. And so, from that episode, Trump's like, never again. I'm never going to allow American cities to burn, just because you have these partisan nut jobs who think they're, the headlines and the images of these burning that are bad for me. And so you have to decide, what images do you want? Like, I don't agree with President Trump in the Navy or the Army, the Air Force coming into our cities. I don't have a problem with the National Guard, because look at what the images are. The images of the National Guard are there walking around. Sure, they look intimidating, but what were the counter images? Federal courthouses burning, people being shot. I choose the latter images.
There's no denying there are some American cities that are far too dangerous for what they should be, especially
100%.
tourist cities, big tourist cities, even San Francisco.
Chicago. Oh, so
Yeah,
don't even get me started about I've given up on San Francisco. It's one of the
yeah. I
most
mean,
it
I wouldn't go
was one of the
there
most beautiful cities in the
again.
world.
But I think, Bryan, I mean, you've been his comms director, his deputy comms director. Do you not think that he needs to be a bit careful with saying things like putting training grounds for the military into their own cities? This is obviously.
Here's what I tell clients. And I represent corporations, I represent foreign governments. I always say with President Trump, ignore the rhetoric, follow the policy. The rhetoric's to capture headlines, the rhetoric's to change the news stories, the rhetoric's to dominate the media, which it does. But the more important thing is to focus on the policy. So, if you're corporations, talk to your shareholders, talk to the board, make sure they don't panic. If you're a head of state, talk to your prime minister, your president, your leaders, and just say, hey, our job is to hear what he says, but also make sure that the policy is not reflective of everything. If you look at the first term, the policy oftentimes is far different than the rhetoric. Look at North Korea. The rhetoric was crazy in Trump one. Crazy. I'm going to bomb you into oblivion. Don't mess with us. But what was the policy? The policy was they actually got together a couple times to try to figure out if there was a path forward. President Trump tried to incentivize, the president of North Korea with a bunch of economic things, so he didn't go and have to go that route. You can get stuck on the rhetoric, but the policy is usually different, and follow that.
Yeah, I mean, he is all talk, and so we just hope it is all talk. But Bryan, let's kind of end the interview with what's really happening in this online spat between Donald Trump and Hakeem Jeffries. We've seen this online spat between the two. Trump posted an AI-generated video of Jeffries in a sombrero and mustache with a fake voiceover of Schumer discussing free health care for illegal aliens, so referencing what we were speaking about at the start of the interview, while Jeffries responded by posting a photo of Trump and Epstein, writing, "This is real." Now, as I mentioned, Bryan, you were literally his former communications director, PR 101. Do you think Donald Trump can escape this Epstein
Oh, he already
nightmare?
has. He already
No,
has.
he hasn't.
He
It's covering
has.
the headlines every single week.
Voters don't care. Like I tell people, clients, ignore the rhetoric, focus on the policy. I should be telling everybody else, ignore the media headlines, focus on what the people are thinking. When we've seen poll after poll, there's this thing in polling that's called open-ended questions. We ask voters, who we're talking to, what do you think's the top three most important issues? For a while there, Epstein popped up. The July Epstein was on that radar a lot. Doesn't even nobody even talks about Epstein in any of these polls. So it's a media headline. It's what the left has because they think that's something there because it creates stuff, but it doesn't move numbers. And I would say this. I would say this. This is a funny thing in a not funny way, right? During the first episode, of the Epstein blow up, you and the media focused on it overwhelmingly. You know what was missed? Earnings calls. It was the end. It was quarterly earnings calls, which would have dominated the media coverage because in the quarterly earnings calls at that moment, you would have seen layoffs are starting to take place. You would have received that data because I was on those calls, and you would just found out how much tariffs are eating up at some of these profits of these companies who can no longer expand and are sort of shrinking. So I think the Epstein thing is a strategic thing to get headlines because it allows people not to focus on actually what's going on.
I mean, of course, it's a great tactic from the Democrats and from the left, Brian, but I don't agree it's going away. We've literally got US lawmakers, including 4 Republicans, supporting this discharge petition to force a House vote on
But
releasing
but what but
whatever.
what's going to be released? But what's going to be
But what
released?
happens, Brian? What happens if it is released? And I'm not saying that Donald Trump's done anything incriminating. What if he's named?
We already know he's named because this file is a plain ledger. He's on the plain ledger. This file. I mean, listen. Donald Trump may appear on the Epstein on whatever the Epstein file is because guess what? He's a New Yorker. He's a Palm Beacher. They interlink and they were friends. Like that is already well documented. Nobody is saying. In fact, people are saying the exact opposite. That Trump did nothing wrong with this. When Trump was on the flight with Epstein, he was with Melania and a third person. So nobody's making the accusations that Trump did anything wrong. They're just saying, he and Epstein. But at the end of the day, it's a headline. It's not moving numbers.
Okay, well, from your PR perspective, just to wrap this up, Brian, if he was innocent, there's nothing to hide there, why wouldn't he say, okay, just release everything you have?
Yeah, listen, there's a lot of privacy issues related to these things. First of all, do the victims want all that information out? I think that's a critical thing. Second of all, what do you do of people who were named in this, but no evidence came forward? Here in the United States, we usually don't public fillet people who with no evidence, by guilt by association. But that's what's happening with these Epstein things. And sure, at the end of the day, there's going to have to be some stuff that's redacted, and this stuff will be released. But from Trump's standpoint, is this is not an issue that the American voters care about. They didn't hire him for these particular things. They hired him to focus on the economy. And he is named, right? We know he's in there. We've seen coverage about it. There are other people there. But how does that change anything?
Well, I guess we'll see what how far these lawmakers get with it. Bryan Lanza, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me again.